Okay. Good morning, and thank you for coming. My name is Bob Runciman, and we're here today to raise awareness of a piece of legislation, Bill S221, that we all believe has real potential to improve the lives of public transit operators. And just as important, Bill S221 will make our streets safer because when a public transit operator is assaulted while behind the wheel, the passengers in the vehicle and everyone else using that street is put at risk. I introduced the bill after hearing some real horror stories, serious assaults that were not taken seriously by our courts, drivers missing months of work, and perpetrators spending not one day in jail. Bill S221 makes it an aggravating factor for the purposes of sentencing if the victim of an assault is a public transit operator. The bill was introduced in the Senate last May, and last month it received royal assent and is now in force. I'd like to thank the people on this stage today for their support throughout this process. And now I'd like to turn the mic over to the Honorable Peter MacKay, Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Senator Runciman. Thank you for your leadership. Minister Uppal, Member of Parliament Chisu, representative of the director, I should say, of the ATU, Mike Mahar, as well as Michel Rousselou, president of CUTA. Thank you all for being here. As was just stated by Senator Runciman, this is an opportunity to bring attention to a very serious issue in Canada, and I want to begin by extending a special welcome and thank you to representatives of the Amalgamated Transit Union and the Canadian Urban Transit Association, as it is their members who work hard every day to get Canadians to work and to their destinations, and to do so sometimes in difficult circumstances, to do so safely in all kinds of weather. And we hope, as a result of this legislation, that they will now be able to do so with greater protection. While they will be the primary beneficiaries of this legislation, it is truly all transit riders and users and Canadians generally who will be better protected. So we're here to highlight that on February 28th, 2015, a new deterrent to violence against transit workers came into force because of Bill S221, also known as the Act to Amend the Criminal Code, Assaults Against Public Transit Operators. These employees now have one more reason to feel safer on the job and to go about their important responsibilities with more confidence. This Senate public bill was introduced, as stated by Senator Bob Runciman, who has really worked tirelessly to see this bill come to fruition. His commitment to and his involvement in public safety stretches back many years, including his time as both a public safety minister and a Solicitor General in the province of Ontario. I know from speaking to him and from other reports that he consulted widely on this bill and put a great deal of pressure on all of those involved to see that the bill moved quickly through the system, which it did so, I note, at an unprecedented pace. He's done so, of course, with the greatest of motivation, the belief that we need to do more to protect vulnerable people. Le projet de loi a été pareil à la Chambre des communes par le député conservateur Cornelio Chisu et a reçu l'appui de notre gouvernement parce que nous croyons qu'il faut défendre les victimes de crimes, ceux qui font preuve de violence envers les travailleurs de première ligne de transport, passer une menace énorme sur la sécurité du public, doivent encourir des peines qui sont proportionnelles à la gravité de leur crime. I should also mention that my colleague Tim Uppal, who will speak in a moment, the Minister of State for Multiculturalism, has been a very enthusiastic proponent of this legislation. He tells me, as have others, that he's heard directly from bus and taxi drivers across the country about being assaulted while on the job. And so I'm pleased that he has been such a strong advocate, and I thank him for joining us here and expressing those concerns as well. Transit operators, as we all know, provide invaluable service, enabling millions of Canadians to travel every day. They deal with a range of passengers, as we can expect: students, seniors, new mothers, persons with disabilities, everyday commuters, all who appreciate the value and convenience of affordable public transit to their communities as well as their pocketbooks. Many transit operators will tell you that dealing with their passengers is, in fact, the best part of their job. Unfortunately, on occasion, some passengers can be difficult due to intoxication, abusive, or even violent behavior. And operators have had to develop special skills necessary to deal with certain volatile situations. It's unpleasant enough when verbal abuse occurs, and there is, of course, a line that is crossed with respect to that type of behavior, but transit operators should never have to deal with physical violence, and that's what we're attempting to deal with today. Now, what makes the situation worse is that anyone who assaults a transit operator is also potentially endangering the vehicle's passengers, along with those in other vehicles, pedestrians, on the street, or the public at large, which could cause devastating circumstances. Canadians, I note parenthetically, take over 2 billion trips a year on various transits. And in fact, there are, on average, 5 assaults against bus drivers every day in Canada. Notre gouvernement est déterminé à faire du Canada un pays où ceux qui contrevenent à la loi sont punis et recevoir une peine et conséquences. En effet, les Canadiens et Canadiennes perdent confiance en leur système de justice lorsque celle-ci ne traite pas les victimes de façon juste et équitable. Ce projet de loi correspond bel et bien à notre détermination à défendre les victimes et à aider à sécuriser davantage nos rues et nos collectivités. The foremost responsibility of any government is to keep its citizens safe. We believe that this act to amend the criminal code will help us to reach that important goal, raise awareness, and I should note as well that it received all-party support, which is an anomaly in today's Parliament. I'm also pleased that the amendments to the criminal code will require, as the Senator has stated, sentencing courts to consider assaults against public transit operators as aggravating circumstances. And so now I would like the Minister of State for Multiculturalism, Tim Uppal, and then we'll hear from MP Chiso as well, to say a few words, and I again take this opportunity to thank them for their sponsorship of this legislation. Merci à vous.
Thank you, Minister MacKay. It is an honor for me to be here today in support of this new legislation to better protect vulnerable taxi and bus drivers across Canada. Each year, far too many hardworking bus and taxi drivers are assaulted by passengers while they're simply trying to do their jobs. I've heard this concern from many people that I know who are in the profession, including my own father, who worked as a transit operator and a taxi driver. And also, as I've heard about this from during my consultations as the Minister of State of Multiculturalism as I travel right across the country. Since Senator Runciman's bill was introduced and became law in late February, I am pleased to have heard strong support from bus and taxi operators. Public transit operators must be able to serve their community in a safe environment without the fear of being attacked on the job. I'm proud to be a part of a government that is standing up for the safety of hardworking Canadians. I would now like to turn the podium over to my distinguished colleague, Mr. Chizu, Member of Parliament for Pickering Scarborough East, who sponsored the bill in the House of Commons and worked to help to make it law. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Minister MacKay, Minister Uppal, Senator Runciman, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Madame et Messieurs. I am pleased to be here today to speak regarding the passing into law of Bill S-221, a bill that addresses, through explicit sentencing principles, the harm caused when public operators acting in the course of their duties are the target of violence. The bill is amending the criminal code to create a new aggravating factor for the sentencing of offenders convicted of uttering threats and any of the 3 assault offenses and unlawfully causing bodily harm to transit operators. It would be no exaggeration to say that without the people who drive our buses, trains, subways, trams, and taxis every day, our economy and our communities would be in peril. This piece of legislation will enable judges to dole out tougher sentences to those that seek to harm public transit operators while carrying out their duties. Not only does it protect the transit operators at their place of work, but also the public who place their trust and lives in the hands of our transit operators each and every day. I would like to thank Senator Runciman for his hard work on this bill, as well as those in the transit community who have spent countless hours educating both the public and the government about the danger that violence against our transit operators presents to not only themselves, but to the general public. I would also like to extend my thanks to the members of the opposition parties who have done their part in making sure S221 became law. Today, all of that hard work was finally realized and results in a meaningful and effective legislation. Thank you very much. And I will pass now to the members of the union.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Chizu. Good morning. I'm Mike Mahar, Director of the ATU Canada. I stand here today on behalf of more than 30,000 members from coast to coast who are grateful to Senator Runciman and MP Chizu for introducing this bill, for the Justice Minister having embraced it, and for all party support as parliamentarians voted across the board unanimously in support of it. This law has been a priority for ATU for more than 10 years. Along the way, we have formed relationships with groups that are equally concerned. And I want to thank the Canadian Urban Transit Association for working with us to get here today. And now, equally important, for working with us to ensure that the public is aware of this law, of this new law, and that it's in place to do what it is intended to do. These attacks on transit operators have been devastating to our industry. They affect our coworkers, our families, and the industry itself. I know because I was a bus driver. In fact, I am a bus driver, and I've personally seen it with my colleagues. The emotional and financial toll on the families of these workers and on industry was intolerable, and the lawmakers have recognized that. Now public transit operators know that if they are attacked or if they're threatened, courts will no longer treat these offenses lightly. The next steps now are to get the message out to the public so that they are aware of it. We know that with proper awareness, this law will be a deterrent, and operators and the public will be safer because of that. And I would like to introduce Michael Rocheleau, President of the Canadian Urban Transit Association, to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Members of the press, ladies and gentlemen, distingués invités. I want to begin by thanking all of you up here with us today for working with CUTA and the ATU this past year to support Bill S221. The amendment to the Criminal Code has been a long time coming for the transit industry and represents a significant step for both drivers and passengers. Je veux souligner l'importance historique de ce projet de loi pour certaines raisons. D'abord, très peu de projets de loi réussissent à devenir une loi durant une session parlementaire. Celui-ci a pu être adopté par les deux assemblées législatives en seulement 9 mois. C'est vraiment impressionnant. Second, very few private members' bills have ever been successful in changing the criminal code. Since 1867, I might add. But in and of itself, these changes to the code will only have limited impact. To act as a deterrent and to maximize its effect, people need to know about it. And that's exactly what we plan to do. That's why CUTA and ATU are proud to announce today the launch of an awareness campaign to educate the public on the impacts of this new law. Our ads, which are displayed here today, will be provided to transit systems across the country and posted on advertising boards, in transit shelters, buses, and trains. Along with this new law, the awareness campaign, and other security initiatives, we believe the industry now has the tools to reduce the nearly 2,000 assaults reported against transit employees every year. Nous espérons aussi que la loi contribuera enfin à accroître la cohérence des sentences rendues dans l'ensemble du pays à l'égard des agressions de même nature. Canadians and their legislators know this was the right thing to do. We applaud members of the House of Commons and Senate for their support, and in particular, the Honourable Peter MacKay, the Honourable Tim Uppal, Member of Parliament, Mr. Chizu, and Senator Runciman for their leadership in working effectively and in harmony with their colleagues on both sides of the Houses to move this legislation forward. Bravo and merci.
Minister MacKay, when you were, if you could come to the podium, when you were Defence Minister, This is followed to a CBC story on an NSA documents. Did you authorize Canada's electronic spy agency to hack into computer networks of allied countries, Mexico, in Europe, and if so, why?
CSC has always acted within Canadian law, and as you know, they have an independent commissioner who happens to be a judge that has repeatedly given his stamp of approval for CSC's activities, including having said that they've always complied with Canadian law.
But did you authorize this activity?
As I said, the activity has always been within the Canadian law, and we don't talk about the operational activities that go on within our security agencies, as you know.
On another story, also wondering whether the government cut a deal with the Firearms Association to change C-42 so that the association wouldn't come out against C-51.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Firearms Association has been decided not to be a witness at the C-51 hearings. They've pulled themselves out, and there's some speculation that that's because there's been some deal cut on C-42.
That would be speculation.
And thirdly, on Syria, are there any legal obstacles under international law to Canada engaging in military operations in Syria, and what would Canada need to establish in order to shift our efforts there?
Well, we of course always examine what Canada's legal obligations would be, but I don't want to be preemptive as far as what the motion itself will read, and that debate will of course unfold this week in Parliament.
On C-51, did you, on break week, hear anything from your constituents when you were out and about mounting opposition to the bill? That the opposition says there is opposition growing to the bill. I'm wondering what you heard over the break.
So the opposition says there's opposition to the bill. Okay. I actually heard from a number of reporters in my community that said that they were very supportive of this legislation, given in particular the amount of illicit activity that's happening online. I heard from parents who were very concerned in particular about radicalization and the material that is very explicit and has been used as a recruiting and radicalization tool. I heard from a number of community members who were quite alarmed, as I think is indicative of a sentiment in the country, by the growing and very troubling acts of violence that have occurred outside of Canada, but we have certainly experienced our own here in Canada. We know that there are ongoing trials and some that have now been completed. We know that there are ongoing investigations and some charges that have been laid quite recently. So let's be clear, this is not a mythical environment that has been created by the government, whether it's looking at what happened in Tunisia, what happened in France, Australia, many countries around the world, and now including Canada. It's incumbent upon our government to act, to modernize, to enable our security forces to preempt and prevent these acts of violence by terrorists and extremists and those who would do harm to our country and to Canadians. And so that's what this legislation is about. It is somewhat ironic that those who are claiming that their protests would be limited, curtailed, or in some way criminalized are out protesting, and they will continue to have that ability to do so as long as it is peaceful, as long as there is no acts of violence, as long as there is no attempts to create a situation where people would be harmed or critical infrastructure would be harmed. Now, were they to take that same peaceful protest to parts of the world where many of the terrorists call home, I dare say that that would not be tolerated, and that's putting it mildly.
Some of the criticism is that the wording on what would be peaceful and what would be violent and what is critical of infrastructure and it's too vague and does provide a catch-all in terms of, let's say, First Nations protesters who may try and blockade something. It's just not clear enough from the legislation where you draw the line.
Well, in my view, it is clear in the legislation. It's also, let's not forget, subject to judicial oversight and interpretation by the court. But look, let's speak practically. If they're not burning, and I'm not talking here only of First Nations, if they're not burning police cars or blowing up critical infrastructure, this is not going to be criminalized. If it's simply holding a sign, chanting, starting a petition, or protesting, and it is peaceful, it is the type of protest that we are seeing, frankly, in some communities with the response to C-51, that will, of course, continue and be perfectly permissible under Canadian law. Pardon me?
Like blocking a rail line or?
Look, there's all sorts of scenarios. It's going to depend on the specifics of the circumstances. If it crosses the line into criminality, there's already sections of the criminal code that would apply.
But it's not only opposition and social groups, it's legal experts too. They're questioning some aspects of the bill. The polls have showed that the support is plummeting. Any chances of you opening the door to some amendments in the bill?
Well, that's a very good question, and it is a question for the chair and the committee that are studying this legislation. I've seen the legal opinions of representatives of the Canadian Bar Association. I disagree with them in particular in suggesting that judges are somehow not perfectly situate to make these determinations, because as we know now, they do already on warrant applications. They're already very well placed to examine the application of the law in a preemptive way, which is what we would require them to do with respect to peace bonds, recognizance, and certain warrant applications by our Canadian security agencies and police.
On the surveillance of the activities of the authorities in C-51, a lot of people who've testified so far have talked about maybe setting up some sort of a parliamentary committee some sort of an oversight system. You don't seem to be quite open to that, and I believe in the past you've raised concerns from other jurisdictions. Could you summarize what exactly is the problem with having some elected official looking at what's going on?
Do you mean having elected officials study legislation the way they're currently doing?
Elected official looking at the operation, setting an oversight committee with elected officials.
Well, the specific concern is around the confidentiality and the handling of top secret information. Simply put, I also believe, after having reflected on this and studied this issue significantly for over a decade, that it is experts with particular training and background in the handling of information, but not only that, but the operations of organizations like the RCMP, like CSIS, and in this particular case, the handling of information that may come from confidential sources outside our country. Because of the cut and thrust and the partisan nature of political committees, I don't believe they're always best situate to handle that type of information or add value.
With the Afghan documents back then,
We have.
there are ways to set it up, and it seems to be something that would ease some concern. Why not go that direction?
Well, or look at examining ways in which we can make the oversight bodies more effective and be able to follow the information.
Mr. McKay, regarding physician-assisted suicide, where's your reflection? Where's the consultation that you promised? Where are you in that?
Well, we are moving forward. We've had a cabinet discussion now. We've had consultations in many sort of private forums, but we have committed to and we will move forward with a broader discussion on this matter. In fact, I'm meeting with certain groups today on this very subject.
What would it be like? Is it on internet? Is it going to be this summer? Is it going to be next September?
We're considering all of those options, and we have now some experience, as you would know, in response to the Bedford case as to a model in which we're able to have broad public input and consultation. So we're looking at ways as to best accommodate people's many diverse and varied views on this critical subject.
When will you have an answer for that? When will you be able to say this is what we're going to do? Are you
Well,
going to do it
we-
before the election, or?
We certainly intend to do it as soon as possible.
Before the election, or?
We'll do it as soon as possible.
Okay, just on C-51, you mentioned that, I asked a question about amendments. You said it's up to the committee, but
It is.
you, Mr. McKay, personally, are you open to some amendments? You co-sponsored the bill.
It's not personally up to me. As I said, the committees are very much the masters of their own destiny. They're in mid-process, as you know, of having experts appear before them. Individuals are now voicing their opinion on this important bill, and we'll await those deliberations. And thus far, as the Prime Minister has said, we've not seen any amendments presented.
Any other
Regarding
questions
this
for
bill?
our guests?
Regarding this bill, concretely, what would it mean for someone assaulting a bus driver? Like 2 more years, double the sentence?
Well, that comes back to judicial authority and examining the circumstances of each and every case. But what this does now is entrench in the criminal code the fact that it must be considered an aggravating circumstance. The ability of a judge to basically give a stiffer sentence.
the sentence, or
You're asking me to theorize what a judge might do with theoretical circumstances. I can't answer that.
Would that be in the life means life category, or is it separate?
Well, you can't get life for assaulting a bus driver.
If you commit a crime on a bus driver, or committed murder, sorry, would it be considered as a life means life thing?
Would it be considered life means life? Well, it could, yes, of course. Depending on the circumstances, the facts of the case.
More questions? Castile?
We wanted to get some photo, I think, of everybody with the posters.
It's a good idea.
Do you want to bring these up?
Yeah. Or
Yes, with the posters. So do we want to stand in front here?
The posters here.
Excellent.
Seen the life cycle.